Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. On this week's episode, I actually do an interview. I do the interview with Jimmy Song. He wrote the book Fiat Ruins Everything, which is new. And if you'd like to support his work, please, in the link in the show notes, there's a link. You can go to his crowdfunding page and please help him out. Support, it takes a lot of work to put these books out, but also it's going to be a good book because I think we all agree Fiat ruins everything. So I'll let him get into all that. But I want to welcome anyone that's a new listener to the show. I do interviews occasionally, and the other weeks I just riff on what's going on in the Bitcoin world as a pleb in my observations, which are just a pleb talking to other plebs in this pleb world. And then I also talk a little bit about my company Movies Plus, my streaming platform, what's going on there, and just different things. I kind of touch on random subjects, whatever comes to mind. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this interview, and if you're new to the channel, I hope you enjoy it and come back and check out some more episodes. And while you guys are doing all that, you should check out the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Go to bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin made simple. Use the promo code Bitcoin made simple, all one word, to get 5% off your order. And you should do that because if you've been paying attention, your coins on the exchange aren't worth shart. So make sure you get a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet and give a shout out to Bitbox because they deserve it. They built a great, easy to use hardware wallet that's so simple. Even I can use it. And it's really easy. It's like the size of a thumb drive, so it's very easy, simple to use, touch screen, all that good stuff. And also shout out to Movies Plus. Go to mymoviesplus.com. Again, I say it all the time. I am so humbled by how many people have used the promo code Cory because this is the only place that I drop that promo code. So it is amazing to me that so many of you are using it. Because yeah, promo code Cory gets you 1 year for $24. So it's $2 a month for a bunch of content. We have exclusive content, we have original content, then we have other content that we license out. And I hope you guys enjoy all of it and get a chance to watch everything because it helps me. We support free speech, we support independent film, and hopefully we can keep growing this to a level where we can have something that takes on the censorship I don't know regime that is at all the other streamers. So that being said, here's the interview with Jimmy, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Well, Jimmy, thanks for coming on. It's a shame I actually had not got a chance to read the book yet, but I definitely will be. Jimmy's new book, Fiat Ruins Everything. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Here is the book, and hopefully you do get a chance to read it, and hopefully you agree with a lot because I put a lot in there, so it should be interesting to anyone that has thought about fiat money and the incentives that it causes.
Yeah, yeah, you're not kidding. I think in Bitcoin, it's impossible not to know that fiat ruins everything if you're a Bitcoiner.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, I mean, obviously, that's the core thesis of the book. Um,
hmm
but and like I said, that being a Bitcoiner, we all know how we get there.
Mm.
What was it in your life that kind of you started to see that made you want to write this book?
Well, I have been doing a podcast much like yourself. Bitcoin fixes this for a while now, and I think the thing that I realized about that podcast was that a lot of the problems that Bitcoin fixes aren't necessarily that Bitcoin is this, such an amazing thing that it suddenly cures cancer or something like that. It's just that fiat is so bad that it ends up corrupting lots of things. And a move to Bitcoin essentially takes away a lot of the corrupt incentives of fiat money. So it's really just sort of like, imagine if you were eating some sort of poison every day and like go on a new diet. It's not that the new diet's so great, although it might be, but it's just that you stop doing the really bad stuff that was poisoning your body. So of course you're going to feel a lot better. Um, And that's sort of the framework that I approach this. And a lot of the things really are broken, and the incentives that fiat money causes in all sorts of things. That's what I wanted to explore, and I did, and I wrote it. So, go get your copy and take a look.
Yeah. So you probably haven't been thought about it this much, or have been
Uh-huh.
asked too much about this angle, but my background is in the movie business. So
Mm,
how has fiat ruined the movies?
mm. Yeah,
Put
great
your thumb
question.
on that.
Yeah, so let's start with what movies actually are. They're more or less entertainment, right? And the thing about movie production is that it's gotten way more expensive since, say, 1971. Now, you might argue, it's because of special effects, or, actor salaries, or, better equipment or things like that. But that's always been the case, right? That you went from silent movies to talking movies, and movies that used color and things like that. There was always sort of new technology. The production budgets sort of stayed very high because you have essentially sort of like almost a monopoly. Well, there is something called Hollywood, where there are independent filmmakers, but they're sort of like gatekeepers to the actual audience, right? There's a huge centralizing force. And this ends up happening in a lot of industries, where you get this one winner take all dynamic in a lot of places, where the bigger you are, the more access to loans you have, and the more access to loans you have, the quicker you can grow. You can scale up very, very quickly, and as essentially crowd out a lot of the smaller guys. That's not to say that there aren't, like, small budget, independent film hits or whatever, but those are few and far between compared to the mega blockbusters and stuff. So what this does is, when you have this winner take all dynamic, and we have what, like, 3 or 4 studios now, where there used to be many, many more, but there's lots of acquisitions and stuff and consolidation. This is the dynamic of fiat money, because the more money you have, the more leverage you have. You can do all sorts of things to crowd out other companies, other smaller competitors, and so on. And Hollywood, like any other industry, has used that to great effect to essentially rule over it. And what ends up happening is that the one or a few winners in a particular industry use that pricing power, or the access to loans and so on, to take advantage. But they also end up being very friendly with regulators, with politicians, and with the powers that be. And as a part of that, they end up sort of pushing certain agendas that are beneficial to the government. Now, this, I think, was a little bit more obvious now than, like, say, 5 years ago. There's a lot of sort of like the DEI agenda, and we're seeing Disney, for example, just getting clobbered because they're producing movies that the market does not want to see. But there's obviously some sort of relationship between a large company like Disney and the government, and, like, sort of pushing that. And that's more of a leftist bias right now, but back in the 50s and so on, they made movies that made you feel patriotic and support all these wars and stuff. So this sort of like subtle control that the government has after you become one of the few that's big, it kind of ruins the artistic merit of a lot of this stuff, because there's sort of like a hidden agenda that a lot of these things get into. Now, I would love to see better movies, but, like, just in the last 20 years, what's been the thing that almost every studio has done? They do sequels, same old stuff. They produce the same things over and over again. I was lamenting with some Bitcoiners, like back in the early 2000s, you had, like, these great movies like The Matrix and Fight Club, like very original, very thought-provoking, very interesting movies. and then you just get like 17 versions of Spider-Man. It just it's gone, like, artistically, it's not very creative. And part of that is this need to scale and this need to like go with the lowest common denominator. It's not really even about the US audience anymore. It's now all global. So, you can't have too much dialogue. It has to be like all action and special effects and things like that. So, in a sense, the artistry of the movie industry, I think, has gone down significantly because there's this huge need to justify these enormous budget movies. If you had a bunch of $20 million movies instead of like $200 million movies, you could take more risks. There would be a lot more art out there. There'd be a lot more opportunity. There probably would be a lot more different kinds of movies, maybe different viewpoints and things like that. But that hasn't been the case. In fact, it's gone very much monolithic, and the centralization that happens as a result of fiat money and the power that money has over all this stuff, it's become rather sad, right? Because we all want better entertainment, we want better art, but unfortunately, it's sort of degraded in many ways because of the role that money has in all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I look at first Disney has destroyed Star Wars, and um, so it's amazing how that if you can have that much money and make a terrible movie, but it also goes to show you how, like you said, all the flashy bells and whistles, like you can throw those things on and kind of cover, like polish a turd basically, just throw as much as you can on and see how it looks. And another interesting thought, like the you pointed out, is how they get cozy with the politicians. The more money you
Mm.
have, the cozier you get, because Mickey Mouse is supposed to be out of copyright a long, long time ago. So if anyone doesn't know that story, that copyright got extended and extended and extended, now in perpetuity, basically. Um,
Mm.
so where else do you see, fiat creeping in? Like, I know a lot of people talk about architecture. Is that something that you
Mhm.
get into in the book?
Yeah, I mean, the fiat reality of real estate, I think, is a whole chapter on that. And just to back up a little bit, the entire chapter on art, it's more about modern art, but really it could apply to movies and lots of other things. So I do address both of these things
Mm-hmm.
to some degree in the book. But with regard to architecture, like think about housing and how much fiat subsidization there's been there. You know. The government makes it very prioritizes housing. So what you get are lots of loans that are available for housing. And if you don't know how loans work, most people think it's off of somebody's savings, that you're getting access to somebody's savings and the bank makes a spread between the arbitrage between the mortgage rate and the savings rate or something like that. That is definitely not how it works. Under fiat money, when you get a mortgage, that money is printed on your behalf, right? Like as a loan, it enters the economy. This is how it works. And it's also why housing has become enormously expensive. Now, because of the subsidization of housing through mortgages, what you get are sort of like an artificially high demand for housing. And a lot of people are more willing to go buy, and because they have access to loans, they're able to essentially get much more housing than they can afford through savings. So most people put 20% down or less, which essentially means that you're getting 5x leverage on your money, and you're essentially gambling on the house that it'll continue to go up in price, which of course is not guaranteed, and we'll see how that affects things in the near future. But what you get are terrible incentives as a result of that. So builders know that there will be demand for housing regardless of how beautiful they make it, and their priority is to get the building up as quickly as possible. So you get architecture that is very cookie cutter, very much, okay, let's get something that will be the minimally um minimal thing that will sell instead of people that are actually building homes for themselves. You get sort of a third party that's building things. You generally get much more beautiful architecture when you're building it yourself, right? Because you want things to be what you want.
Right,
Instead,
to
you have
last
this.
and
Yeah. And even now, like, custom homes are way more beautiful than like sort of the generic homes that builders build, because the way the mortgage market works, once the house exists, then you can get a loan on it. To get like a building loan on it is not easy, and the same programs that you get for a mortgage, those don't apply. So you get a lot of sort of perverse incentives as a result of fiat money, that first make it way more expensive and make it so that it's a third party creating a house, and then it belongs to the bank, and then they sell it to you, essentially some combination of that, rather than people building homes that they like. That's generally when you get to see beautiful architecture like we did like a couple hundred years ago. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of other things as well. There's a lot of high time preference behavior in housing selection as well. Most houses aren't built to last more than 30 years. I know in my neighborhood, a lot of houses are being demolished to make way for newer housing and so on. Not to say that that's necessarily bad, since they were kind of built shoddily in the first place, but that's kind of the mentality that a lot of people have. It's not about building to last. It's building to sort of quickly turn around and make a profit.
yeah, that when me and my wife were house hunting, that was
Mm.
like nothing made us cringe more than when we went into a neighborhood that was like, I kept telling her, I said it's just like a fiat neighborhood, like where it's like everybody had like every little plot of land, and every
Mhm.
it was like type A, B, and C house, and it was just like there's type
Mhm.
A, B, C, then A, B, C, A, B, C, and it was like, ugh. Yeah, so we thank God we lucked out and found like a nice farmhouse and just you know did that instead. But yeah, it is amazing how um I feel like it even affects like the fast food industry. Like we know the
Mm.
food, obviously, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but like there was a McDonald's near us. I mean, like
Mm.
25 minutes from us. It's the closest one to me. And we drive past it, and it was, perfectly fine the one day, and then like the next day we drive by and it's all rubble. And I was like, did something go through? Like I live in Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
Like there's not tornadoes, there's not hurricanes.
Mhm.
What happened? Um, and they just remodeled it to like the new like lame McDonald's, that like is like a
Mhm.
shoebox
Mhm.
and like has no individual characteristics that look, like beautiful or anything. But the other amazing part was they did it in like 30 days. Like they
Mm.
just destroyed an entire building and built a new one. And I
Mhm.
said to my wife, I was like, that thing couldn't, handle like a strong windstorm, I bet. And like that's probably how most of these fiat builders do it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't doubt that. And this is in sharp contrast to something like a cathedral, which took like over 100 years to build, and it was like a labor of love. This is entirely functional, and you knock it down and build it up fast. Now, that's not to say that because it was built quickly, it's necessarily shoddy or anything, but it does sort of like show that it's not architecture that's meant to be there very long. If they crush the previous one, it's not going to be there another, past like 50 years at the most, and probably a lot less than that. And in a sense, this is possible because, the land isn't like something that somebody is trying to make into a beautiful site or anything like that. It's part of a corporation, and for them it's a very straightforward calculation, like, can we make more money by doing this? Or more likely, they have access to these quick loans, or these large loans to finance the the building of this new one. If they had to do it out of savings, right? If they had to save up to build something, I'm sure they would have, first of all, like wanted something that lasted longer and was built with better stuff. This is just how we behave when we have to save up for something. But if you're bringing consumption forward through debt, then you're going to just want things like whatever, because you're focused on paying that debt back very quickly. So whatever costs the least, and it ends up being very kind of shoddy. And I don't doubt that that's probably the experience of a lot of architecture here, but not just architecture, lots of other things. Bringing consumption forward, people like that are generally high time preference, so they're not necessarily that concerned about quality. But if you're saving, then you do care about quality, and you do want things to last, and you want value for your money. And this is the difference between debt and savings, is that you demand more from savings because you worked harder for it.
Yeah, exactly. And you want some speaking of things that don't, aren't built to last, and somebody that doesn't save money would be the government. And uh I like my grandfather would be so proud of me. My dad said, because I was complaining about construction, and I was like, it's just, like a money laundering scheme. Like that's what it is, because it's like every 6 years, if you look in, there's old villages around the world where, I don't know if you ever saw how they built it, but like they dug down 6 feet and did multiple layers and built this road, and the road still works today. And it was built before Jesus was born. So like, there that, and then you look, around, the United States, where it's like every 5 years the road gets like stripped down. They put like, oil chips down, and they're like, oh, we're doing it again. Sorry, you have to sit in construction. So uh talk about that a little bit. The fat cat that is, I guess, the government, and is kind of the opposite. I assume you talk about them a little bit in the Fiat Ruins Everything.
Yeah. There's a whole chapter on nation states and the incentives at the nation state level. And like you said, the incentives for a government are very different. And by the way, the book is organized sort of like at different layers, right? Like, so at the individual level, you have different incentives as a result of fiat money. At the company level, you have different incentives because of fiat money. At the nation state level, you also have different incentives as a result of fiat money. And at the global level, everyone has different incentives because we live under a dollar hegemony and, basically have to satisfy the US. So to get back to the nation state level, what governments generally want more than anything else is to stay in power, right? Like if you're ruling over some people, your first priority is staying in power. And that generally means satisfying your constituents and things like that. And not necessarily about justice or anything, but just making sure enough people are satisfied so they keep you in power. And especially in a democracy or some sort of representational democracy or some sort of voting, you have to sort of satisfy their stuff. But you don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money doing that, right? Like you want to spend as little as possible, or you want to do it you're not necessarily going to do it in a way that lasts. I mean, you might spend a lot of money, but it's just let's get them on our side, and that ends up with shoddier construction and all kinds of stuff. But more importantly, on the perspective of government, they spend a lot more money and time and things on a police state, right? You want to make sure that you root out any threats to your rule. A lot of military, if it's an external entity that's going to come and take you over, then you need to repel against that. So that's what you spend money on, rather than say, something that's actually going on in your own country that might actually benefit it, and things like that. So you get a lot of really perverse incentives at the nation level because you have this ability to do some backdoor implicit taxation through inflation. And they spend a lot of money in a very inefficient way, usually, because there's all sorts of grift and rent seeking that happens in that spending. So you were talking about like all the roads and construction and stuff that happens in the US and how long they take and how they're really kind of grips. And they are because the way the bidding system works and how all of that is measured and all the different political considerations, they're not necessarily thinking about cost. It's way more about, okay, how do we make sure that we get the right votes and stuff, and how do we put regulations in so that it feels fair to people. And it's not about the road. It's all about, okay, how do we get the most political points out of this? And unfortunately, that this is why the government doesn't do a great job on almost anything, because they're not trying to satisfy the market per se. They're trying to satisfy themselves in terms of political needs and so stuff like that.
Yeah. Wanted to talk about food a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the perverse, you keep saying, the perverse incentives. And I'm just sitting here thinking about you talking about the government regulations, and then we look at our food. Do you talk about that in the book?
Not too much. I feel like safety definitely explore that quite a bit
Yeah.
in Fiat standard and stuff. But I do think like the same dynamic applies. The thing that we talked about earlier with movie studios and like the few companies that sort of control everything, it's definitely true of food as well. You have what, like five big ad companies or something like that control everything. The actual subtle thing at play is that when you have access to loans, when you have access to extra money that everybody else doesn't, and if you're a big company, you certainly have that small companies don't. The thing that it lets you do is scale like crazy. So you can get really, really big, and you can get a lot of the economies of scale, by which means you can sort of underprice everybody. But the economies of scale only take you so far, and particularly in food, what you need to do to underprice everyone is use different ingredients. And what a lot of these large food companies have done is bring in a lot of ingredients that are insanely cheap. A lot of carbs are really cheap. Sugar is insanely cheap. Grains, things like that, are really cheap. And substitute for the things that are more expensive. Meat, nutritional food. Things that are not grown in factory farms and so on. They've essentially made food really, really cheap to underprice everybody, because not only are you getting rid of competition, but you can hide the inflation by degrading the food. So in any fiat economy, you have the choice of raising prices or debasing your product, and people don't like higher prices. And it might be a while before they recognize that your food product or whatever product that you have is debased. So most manufacturers go down that route of debasing the product itself, and that's definitely happened with food over the last 60 years. Similar thing with almost everything else, actually.
Yeah.
But this is the dynamic that we get. So the thing is, like, with nutritional food, we probably should be paying at least double to get the same amount of or get better quality food that people 60 years ago got. But because of inflation, because of money printing, because of all of the weird incentives that come as a result of fiat money, we've just sort of taken it for granted that it's okay to debase our food, instead of spending more money on it, and that's unfortunately gone to the detriment of American health. We see the obesity epidemic. Like, there's way more sugar in all kinds of foods than there were 60 years ago, and so on. And this has, led to way more dependency on the healthcare system. And, my friend Joel Salatin likes to say that you can either spend more money on food or you can spend more money on healthcare, because that's what it ends up being. and we've chosen to spend way more money on healthcare instead of food, and what you get is an entire healthcare industrial complex, which is another whole thing where, you know, a few companies end up taking over. You have what, like six
Six
major
major
insurance
health providers.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like and they dictate the price of everything. You know, this is what fiat does, is it centralizes a lot of stuff. The production of or the provision of any good or service ends up in the hands of a few people that can dictate everything. And you know, we get worse outcomes as a result of this sort of almost monopoly-ish stand that they have in the system. I like to say that, you know, when you have fiat money, you trend towards socialism because it becomes centralized, and there's way more regulation, and you know, whether you know, it seems like a free market or not, the incentives and inevitably lead towards a more socialist system. And unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of okay with that. A significant percentage of the population doesn't really kind of understand what the incentives at play, so they're okay with it, or you know, they've been deceived into thinking that, you know, it's all for humanity's good or whatever, but really you're just debasing everything, civilization, along with the money.
Yeah. You know, the longer I've been into Bitcoin now, the more I think like I don't know how long this can last. You know, like I think in 300 years they're looking back at this era of money and they're going to go, "Whoa. Like that thing was a freight train, you know, going towards a cliff that nobody had brakes for." I mean, there are no brakes. If anything, it's just an accelerant. You know, right now the Fed's trying to pump the brakes. That's all they're doing is pumping the brakes, and it's basically wrecking the economy. Um, what about so full disclosure, because I mean my audience knows I talk about it, you know, a good amount, but I'm a Catholic, so
Mhm.
you know, I see the cross on your shirt there, and
There you go.
I had to think, you know, did you put anything in there about how fiat um, affects religion? Because I'll be completely honest, like I tell people all the time, I say I'm Catholic, but I also am like looking at the Vatican and all the
Mhm.
gold and the you know the border, like the border wall around the city, and I'm like, you know, that I'm pretty sure would be the exact opposite of what Jesus wanted. Just
Mhm.
my opinion. Like it
Mhm.
seemed like he was more for the poor and more for,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
uh, helping others and not for raising walls. So I do look at it and go, I see
Mhm.
fiat affecting religion too, and it's not just
Mhm.
Christianity. It's I'm
Mhm.
sure every religion.
Mm. Yeah, I do cover it in Thank God for Bitcoin, but not so much in this book. Although I did want to write that chapter. It's just I had so many thoughts on it, and how the church has become way more consumerist, right? So what you find with anything where fiat, you get some sort of fiat infection, is that because of the primacy of money, you end up with you know, like churches almost become businesses, right? Like they become sort of like an enterprise in some way. And this is, of course, completely against the spirit of Christianity, at least, right? Like Jesus said, you can serve God or money, you can't serve both. Yet that is exactly what a lot of churches end up doing, because
Yep.
they take out loans to, you know, build their churches or something like that, and you know, bring consumption forward, and they end up servicing debt. And think about what those words mean. They service debt. They are worshiping money, right? Like that is exactly the opposite of what Jesus said. And that leads to a lot of subtle things, right? Like it used to be, at least, you know, in the sound money era and stuff, you'd get a lot of sermons from the pulpit that were about like this is what you should do, and like here are the ways in which you're sinning. You need to go repent and change your ways and stuff like that. Even reading Jesus's sermons, right, in Matthew or something like that, you see, okay, like if you're doing this, you're doing something wrong, and you need to change. Like that sort of message is not that often heard from pulpits, and the reason is because, again, churches have become more like businesses. If you don't get enough butts and seats and you can't pay off your loan and the money, or you can't pay your staff, the professional clergy and stuff. So you end up having messages that, instead of being what Jesus would have taught, it's to get more butts and seats. It's to get more people to come to the church. It's to get more tithes and offerings, and it's become, money has become sort of like the primary thing that a lot of churches go after. So I was talking in my Bible study about like the spiritual gift stuff. I'm not sure how prevalent that is in the Catholic world, but at least in the Protestant world, this is like a major thing. Like, what spiritual gift do you have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
let's figure that out. And that's like such a consumerist mentality, right? Like, let's figure out what gift you have, and let's talk all about you and make it all about you, and see, indulge in your narcissism. This is the exact opposite of what Jesus preached. It was about thinking about other people and loving others. Instead, it's like, oh, we're gonna make this sermon all about you, and we're gonna make it all about what you're going to be able to do, and let's examine your personality and stuff. It's not about obedience to God. It's about, oh, what things do you think you might be able to do that might be good for the church, or something that you might want to do. It's become very consumerist, and I think it heavily detracts from the gospel message, and it detracts from genuine faith and real religion in many, many ways. And it's unfortunate that it's gotten to this point, but fiat money has like definitely penetrated the church in a way that I think like a lot of people are just completely blind to. They don't really understand what's going on. I mean, I know a few pastors that have sort of lamented this. It's like, well, this is what I want to preach, but I can't because the elders will get mad at me, because this will piss off a bunch of people. But this is the truth. This is what Jesus pissed off a lot of people. That's okay. That's a part of saying the truth, is that the people that believe lies will get mad at you. But instead you get sort of like this very soft, like fiat political Christianity, which is, let's make everyone happy and we all love each other and blah blah blah, and it's all about making people feel good so they can come to our church and give us tithes. It's not about salvation or your eternal life or the obedience to God. It becomes something else. So I think that's definitely been an infection. And I do want to write all this down at some point and, put it into, I don't know, maybe like an addendum to a book if I do like a second edition or something like that. And unfortunately, like it's just such a close topic for me, so personal that
Yep.
it's, I don't know. It's, yeah, I have to step back a little bit almost to be able to write it and put it in.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand that. I mean, I think, well, first of all, saying that fiat infects things is a great
Mm,
analogy.
mm,
Um, but the uncomfortable truths, when you're talking about like confronting truth, and like that's
mm,
something that Jesus did. I feel like that's also what fiat does, is it helps you avoid the uncomfortable truth.
mhm,
Like, I can't afford this. I shouldn't
mm,
buy that.
mm,
And to me, like reckoning, like the Bitcoin reckoning for me over the years has been like, I think not everybody goes through this process, but you face those like uncomfortable truths of like, I can't afford all these things I've been buying, you know,
mm.
like the last car I bought before I became a Bitcoiner, I'm just like, oh my God, what was I doing? I'd give anything to go back and just buy some old car.
Mhm,
Um, so but that's part of our lesson and how we get here. Um,
Well,
before,
let
yeah,
me
yeah, go ahead.
like riff on that a little bit, because uh what fiat money and what debt specifically allows you to do is to suspend reality for a while, right? If you bring consumption forward, you think you're more prosperous than you are, but really you're enslaving yourself for later. And this is the exact opposite of the natural way of doing things, which is to save, 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 and then you get rewarded for saving. You get to spend what you saved up for, and this is sort of like the way it's supposed to be. And you read about that all over the Bible about sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. You put in some amount of work into something and you get rewarded for it. Debt is a complete reversal of that, and fiat money specifically makes that like completely ubiquitous and allows you um, to bring consumption forward in a way that suspends reality for the duration of that debt. And it enslaves you during that time, right? Like you can suspend reality for a little bit, and that may be, it may seem fine for a little while, but as soon as the bill comes due and you're enslaved for that, you end up with all kinds of things breaking. And that's kind of the situation we're in now, because the Fed is raising rates, and when you have rising interest rates, what ends up happening is that fewer loans are going out. In fact, we're in the midst of a monetary contraction. All these bills are coming due, and if these bills are coming due, then what's essentially happening is reality is slapping back, right? We're getting to see just how much we've sort of kicked the can down the road, and we're finally having to face it, not just at the individual level. I mean, you were talking about a car that you couldn't afford, that where you brought consumption forward. It's not just at the individual level. Companies did this, right? Like they
Yeah,
took out huge loans to expand facilities and things like that. I mean, a lot of these companies haven't like ever made a profit, and they're still worth billions of dollars according to the stock market and so on. And their bills are coming due. Governments, right? Like a lot of state and federal governments, they spent money that they didn't have. They brought some consumption forward. They built stuff that they couldn't afford and so on. And all of that just sort of like starts breaking. And honestly, a lot of what we've been seeing the last year or so, where like there's this sort of consumer backlash against a lot of these companies and so on. This is the bill coming due.
mhm.
This is reality slapping back. We don't want to watch movies that are just sort of like have an agenda and stuff like that. As you get more away from fiat, and monetary contraction is definitely like the opposite of what happened the last like 60 years. As you get away from that, you get closer to reality. The suspension of reality is starting to end, and you get a lot more real stuff coming out. And turns out a lot of these businesses were completely unsustainable, never had a profit at all. And a lot of people's spending habits were completely off the rails and not based in reality. And everyone's going to have to kind of learn a lesson. Or they can start printing again and bail all of these people out, in which case they will continue the terrible habits of bringing consumption forward and thinking that the enslavement in the future wouldn't be so bad, instead of the Bitcoin way of doing things, which is saving and then reaping what you sow.
Yeah. I had like a million thoughts while you're so I was like it
Uh-huh.
was like, oh yeah, that like it's like I'm hitting all these things like, yeah, that points to that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
where you're just the enslavement, and I think I just think that's why, everybody that looks like, oh, Bitcoin standard, well, it'll be this, you know, sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and everything's gonna be perfect. And I'm like, I don't know. I think it's gonna be an ugly transition because,
Mm-hmm.
um, what's the old saying? When the water tide goes out, we'll see who's swimming naked. And like, you mentioned the one like these companies building things. My brother works for a bank, like one of the biggest banks in the country, and they built two skyscrapers in Pittsburgh. And this, they like finished them in like 2018, and then COVID happened, and he now works from home, and nobody's in the office, and they're doing, lots of offices are doing this, like, come back to the office, come back to the office. But he specifically, he lives in Pittsburgh. The rest of his team is like, one's in Denver, one's in
Mhm.
Cleveland, one's in like Georgia, and it's like
Mhm.
there's literally no, like, he would be doing the same thing from home
Mhm.
that he would do from his desk at the office, but they're just trying to, in my mind, justify that
Mhm.
expense because that was money they didn't have. They, that bill, that's a loan that they took out, to
Well,
build that
they're
building.
trying to increase the occupancy, so there's more. They fill up some of the demand, and hopefully, or fill up some of the supply, so that they can sell whatever inventory that they have at a little bit of a higher price. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this sort of like stuff happens all the time, where if you finance the building of something, well, then and you don't you can't pay off the debt, then you go bankrupt. And it's that's there's actually like an index called like the world's tallest skyscraper index or something like that. It turns
Mm-hmm.
out that in every boom time, somebody starts building like the world's tallest skyscraper, and by the time the project gets going, you usually get into a recession, and those buildings almost always have trouble finishing, which is an interesting phenomenon. It sounds like your brother's skyscrapers are similar to that. But there's a problem with sort of building on debt or financing and stuff like that. You don't, it's not money that you saved up, so you're not very careful with it, and you're much more speculative about it, and you end up wasting lots and lots of capital. Like these two skyscrapers probably weren't needed, and if they had a chance, or if they had to build out of savings, they would have probably built something more modest that they knew they could fill up very quickly, or got commitments for beforehand. Instead, they did this. Oh, let's just build it and see what happens. And in a sense, they were playing with house money anyway, since the financing that they got to go build the building came out of nothing. It was
Mm-hmm.
literally money printed on their behalf. And this they were able to suspend reality a little bit, but then reality slapped right back, right? Like all of these people aren't coming into work, and this building might eventually get full occupancy, but it's going to take many, many more years, and you're not going to make the money back. Somebody's going to go bankrupt, and it's a waste of enormous amounts of capital. And like just to sort of talk a little bit more about reality slapping back. One of the things I'm noticing during this particular, the last year or so, is that manual labor is kind of getting a lot more respect, right? Like in terms of money and stuff. You just saw, for example, the UPS drivers were able to negotiate something like $170,000 a year. And I think
Mm-hmm.
they deserve every penny, because in a sense, they really are providing value, right? Like they're transporting stuff.
They actually
Whereas
work
like
hard.
whereas like the typical rent seeker, the guy with an email job in the office, it is not at all clear what they are contributing. And those salaries are going down. You have like enormous layoffs in Twitter, and like these tech companies, a lot of
Disney
these
laid off a ton of people.
yeah, and it's because they're, in a sense, they were rent seeking. And as you get more towards reality, the people that actually contribute stuff get more a larger share of the money, I think. And the monetary tightening means that there's less room for rent seekers, so rent seekers are sort of the first people cut. And that's what we're seeing. The people that do the work get more rewarded, and the people that weren't doing the work, well, they're getting cut. You get more rationality. You can't just rent seek forever and ever, which is what essentially the promise of fiat money. You're getting people that if you're a welder, if you're like a garbage truck driver, times are pretty good for you right now, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're able to make a lot more money than you know I don't know, marketing associate at like a large tech company or something like that. You probably got laid off if you're a social media manager for a newspaper or something. Like definitely got laid off if you did any of that stuff. The people that actually do stuff that's of value, they're doing pretty well. And this is the sort of like reality slapping back. The money flows towards the people that are actually providing value rather than the people that are rent seeking.
Which is like exactly what we want in a Bitcoin world. Because I mean, the only way in a Bitcoin standard world is to get more Bitcoin is to provide value to someone. Nobody is gonna just sit there and give you, 10% of a Bitcoin a month to, to live. They're just not gonna do it. Well, before I let you go, I also wanted to, this isn't completely book related, but given that I think we're just on the verge of a massive bubble again, and that's what caused, that's not what caused Satoshi to come out, but coincided with Satoshi releasing Bitcoin. As a core Bitcoiner, that's a better way to look at it, because you look at Satoshi as a core Bitcoiner from the beginning. How do you view the health of Bitcoin as we get into a recession that I think will be worse potentially than 2008?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the way I see it, first of all, like there are a lot of Bitcoin developers, and they are all over the political and economic map. There are like full-blown socialists in there. There are, anarcho-capitalists in there. There are people that are super liberal in there. There are people that are, very conservative in there. It's a wide spectrum. So there's no one opinion, right? It's a decentralized contribution system, and they're going to have lots and lots of different opinions. So I'll only speak for myself. What do I think is happening with all of this stuff? Well, I mean, they're tightening. They're trying to press monetary levers because there were signs that a lot of stuff was breaking, and they continue to break. We've seen prices just go up like crazy. We saw a lot of systematic fragility with the supply chain stuff. We're seeing a lot of that, and the cracks are beginning to show. I mean, how far does this go? Well, I in a sense, I expect it to go further. A lot more stuff is going to break before, I don't know, they reverse course. I think Jerome Powell said that they're ready to raise rates further, right? Like break things even more, because inflation really isn't slowing down. And according to Lynn Alden, we might get, even if you keep raising rates, you still might get stagflation and higher inflation and things like that. There's just so many things that are just so fragile right now that you might get something like that. Personally, I think Bitcoin is sort of that backstop, and that's the hope that a lot of Bitcoiners have, is as things break, the degree of breaking is sort of backstopped by Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is that if you look at any sort of like hyperinflating economy, so Argentina and Lebanon are two countries that I visited in the last year. They're both going through something like hyperinflation. And what you're seeing is that the dollar becomes sort of the standard. It becomes sort of the backstop for a lot of these economies. So as bad as things could be, and as bad as things are, it's somewhat limited in the damage it can inflict, because there's sort of an outside currency that people end up using. So, somewhere like Venezuela, it's where it's harder to get dollars. It gets much worse, because people don't have dollars to trade, and you're forced to use this hyperinflating currency. Somewhere like Lebanon, where you could get dollars out of an ATM, that makes a big difference, because the Lebanese government can't keep printing and get that much benefit out of it. In fact, the benefit they get out of additional printing tends to get limited as they print more and more of this backstop happens. And I think that's what ultimately happens with the US dollar. As things get worse, this alternative system, it ends up being the backstop. As you get hyperinflation and things like that, you have this alternative, and that alternative ends up becoming the thing that that changes the trajectory. Instead of continuing to fall, you get a softer landing because you have this sound money that's available to trade and save in. And so a lot of capital is preserved, a lot of civilization, honestly, is preserved, and you get a different set of incentives that uh, that that emerge as a result of the lack of fiat money. And honestly, that's a lot of what the book is about. It's like, okay, how does all of this change under a Bitcoin standard? A lot of it changes because the incentives are different, and once the incentives are different, well, and you don't have this free money spigot, controlled by a few people, and every industry controlled by a few companies, and so on. You get a lot more diversity of approaches, and lots of different kinds of goods and services, a lot more entrepreneurship. You get more experimentation, and the best stuff emerges from the market, and you get prosperity. And I think that's ultimately what will be happening, even as things get worse from the dollar. I think things get better with Bitcoin.
And thank God for Bitcoin, right?
Indeed.
We tell people, where can they support you and get a copy of this book?
Yeah, so you can. I'm right now doing a crowd fund for Fiat Ruins Everything. And you can go to fiatruinseverything.com to support me in the crowdfund. But if you just want the book right now, you can go to Amazon and search up Fiat Ruins Everything. It's available for sale. But yeah, I would obviously appreciate it if you participated in the crowdfund to defray some of the costs of writing this book.
Awesome. Well, everybody support Jimmy and the good work that he's doing, because we need more people like that. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Jimmy for joining me on the show. And thanks to all of you for listening. And thanks to the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet for sponsoring the show. Go get one at bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin Made Simple. Bitcoin Made Simple. Use that promo code and you'll get 5% off. I will talk to you guys later.